I know the one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I just keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on the freedom line. Ain't gonna let nobody, can't let them turn me around, Lord, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I just keep on walking, I keep on because I'm marching on a freedom land. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse, ain't let it turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no jailhouse turn me around. I keep on, I just keep on because I'm marching on a freedom land. I can't let segregation turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. I just keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on the freedom land.
The civil rights movement's first goal was to eliminate legal segregation.
Made me accept that integration was here to stay and that I should and do start realizing that, they have the black people who moved in certainly have rights, certain rights and things that they gained by this civil rights movement. So it affected me pretty greatly.
Mrs. Rosa Parks was arrested and taken down to jail, taken from the bus, just because she refused to give up her seat. At present, we are in the midst of a protest, the Negro citizens of Montgomery, representing some 44% of the population. 90% at least of the regular Negro bus passengers are staying off the buses, and we plan to continue until something is done.
As you have seen, the blacks were persistent on getting what they wanted. However, the whites weren't going to back down. They didn't want segregation before the civil rights movement, and they definitely didn't want it during the civil rights movement. And the question is, why? When asked how this time affected his life, Robert Dotson responded with,
Well, the experience impacted my life just like it impacted many more people. I was one of the ones, too, that I was not too happy with the way things were going there, and I figured that we were better off staying the way we were. I wasn't against trying to integrate, but I was not exactly for it either because I thought, well, okay, let us do what we can for these people who were black. Give them as many opportunities as the white person can, but I wasn't too happy about really integration.
So that's the reason. The whites eventually learned that blacks were people too, but that didn't mean they wanted them part of their life, ever. Therefore, the whites too were fighting for their rights, which is another major social impact. The whites were fearful of the unknown. They always had segregation. They were afraid to change, and they were going to do everything in their power to keep that from happening. George Wallace was also one of the people who believed he was fighting for his rights.
In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
As the unquestioned leader of the peaceful civil rights movement in the 1960s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was at the same time one of the most beloved and one of the most hated men of his time. He wanted this so bad he risked everything he had for the freedom of the blacks. His house was even bombed. But he never stopped trying. From his involvement with the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 until his untimely death in 1968, Martin Luther King Jr.'s goals were two simple words: equality and nonviolence. After his organization of the bus boycott, King formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the CLC, which dedicated itself to the advancement of rights for African Americans. In April 1963, King organized a protest in Birmingham, Alabama, called the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Boycotts, sit-ins, and marches were conducted by King, and therefore King was arrested. But support came all around the nation and the world for King and his family. Later in 1963, he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech to thousands in Washington, D.C.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Made everybody start to think, well, you know, maybe he is right. I think he went a little too far sometime, but he did what he thought was right for his people. When Martin Luther was shot and killed, you know, that was definitely not the thing to do, whether you disagreed with him or not.
In one moment, just one moment, it all ended. That shot affected America. It affected Black America in such a way, you know, I can't begin to express to people what happened. I know how I felt. I mean, the tears would not stop. And Martin was dead.
After King's death, socially, things were still bad, and another major impact was the education of children. The blacks weren't getting the education they needed. Protest after protest, blacks continued fighting for their children until finally, on the day of May 17, 1954, school segregation was banned. As you can see, at first, not many African American children actually showed up for school in fear of discrimination. But as years went by, the percentage got higher and higher. Overall, what you should take from this video is all of the social impacts of segregation during the 1960s. If you missed them, here they are. A lot of the impact was mostly violence. The violence was presented in several forms, such as blacks getting beaten to death or shot for a reason as simple as standing in the wrong line. Another would be all the bombings. Martin Luther King's house was not the only place that was bombed. There were hundreds of bombings in places like restaurants, buses, and houses of any colored people. Another impact separate from violence was education. Blacks were put in situations where nobody really cared if they were smart. They were put in the worst schools with the worst teacher and the worst. Martin Luther King himself was also an impact of segregation. His leadership made him the most hated person to the whites, yet he was the most loved of the colored. He literally changed the world. One final social impact of segregation was the protests. There were hundreds and thousands of them. Actually, it wasn't just protests that occurred. It was protests, riots, sit-ins, boycotts, and every form of protesting you can think of. It happened.